I am Kathryn Kidder. Today is July 10th, 2020. I'm with Dee Ann Connor. Would you please say your full name with maiden name and spell it?
Shirley Dee Ann Stevens Connor, Shirley, 2 words, D-E-E, capital A-N-N, 2 words, Dee Ann Stevens, S-T-E-P-H-E-N-S, and Connor, C-O-N-N-O-R. And I go by Dee Ann.
I'm with Dee Ann today to discuss the Agricultural Women's Club. But first, we'd like to know something about your own background. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in December the 3rd, 1937. I'm 82 years old.
Were you born in a hospital?
No, I was born in the back of the doctor's office.
Was that by design?
I think it was due to finances and everything else, according to what the family, my mother was very young. She was married at 16, had me when she was 17, and my brother when she was 18. So they didn't have much money. And so I'm sure that it was a matter of finances that I did not go to a hospital.
What were your parents' names?
My father was Daniel C. Stevens. My mother was Elsie Pearl Story, S-T-O-R-E-Y, Stevens. Her maiden name, Story.
Were they from that area?
My father was from Boaz, Alabama, which is north and a cotton plantation, and mother was born in Birmingham.
Can you tell us your grandparents' names?
My grandmother was Flossie Pearl Green, Green, Story Lovell. She remarried, and in those days, you know, that was very rare to divorce. But she was an entrepreneur and worked herself and had 5 children and was quite a philanthropist herself, big in her church, and did major fundraising for what became the University of Alabama's crippled children's clinic. Back in those days, we had the polio situation, and she sold bricks by bricks, $1 a piece, to help fund what is now the University of Alabama's children's wing of the hospital. But back then it was called the Crippled Children's Clinic due to the polio virus that we had at that time. And the grandfather was Farrell Noble Story. And he worked for the L&N Railroad Station. My grandmother worked, she took a trolley to downtown Birmingham, which was quite a lengthy time, and she sold Buster Brown shoes. Back in those days, you had the big machine that you put your feet in, and you look down through to see if your shoes fit. So she had a big, she had a job, and she had, it was an eventful event to get there and back. And then she had the 5 children that she had to cook and feed.
Where did you grow up, Dee Ann?
Birmingham, Alabama. And mother died when I was 13. So I kind of took over the family cooking and kind of was the secondary mother to my brother. And my 2 aunties were kind of surrogate mothers to us.
What was your house like?
It was a very small rental, and at the time, after her death, my dad moved to a 2-bedroom rental. Before that, we had a large home that was almost big enough to house 2 families. And from time to time, my mother's older brother's family came and lived with us during the war.
What are some of your earliest preschool memories?
Preschool, I'm not real sure. I do remember certain sections of the grade school. When I was 5, I had a big birthday party and a velvet dress, and my grandfather, the step-grandfather, who was the most loving human being on earth, gave me a little watch for my 5th birthday. And I have adorable pictures of that. I remember in the 5th grade, that's when I was 5 years old, but in the 5th grade, I had taken some flowers along the way as I walked to school and kind of snipped them off to take to the teacher. And I handed them to the teacher thinking she would just be excited for this bundle of flowers. And she opened the window and threw them out. And I was crushed, just crushed. And at that point, it was much, much, much later in life that I understood that they were the goldenrods, which was a state flower of Alabama, but people were allergic to the goldenrod. However, she did not explain that to me. So I was hurt, crushed, and offended. But I remember that she was just quickly and tossed out the window my little bouquet of flowers.
And that was unforgettable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have some better recollections of elementary and schools?
Yes, I was, my brother and we had neighbors that were all boys. And I had 2 uncles that were like 10 and 15 years older than we were. So I was kind of the tomboy of the group. So I played baseball, softball, baseball. I was the one that could swing when we got bicycles. My brother couldn't swing his leg over, but I could ride his bike. So therefore, at a point, we switched bikes for a little while till he could grow taller and swing his leg over his bar for the bike. But I always had wonderful friends, mostly the boys, because of where my grandmother lived. There were like 4 and 5 boys. My grandmother had a wonderful maid that did tea parties for me, and tea parties with lemonade, cookies, and played dolls with me. And so she was the most loving. Her name was Opal. So I had 2 pearls and an opal in my life. And my granddaughter's name is Ida Pearl. So they've picked up the pearl to carry that forward.
What about high school years?
I was president. I have been president of all my organizations since I was 15 and 16. I was president of the Marshall's Honor Society. I was president of a high school sorority, and I had 150 girls in between 2 schools, Woodlawn, where I went to, Woodlawn High School, and Phillips High School. And so it was a sorority of about 150 girls. We did major fundraising of selling donuts. So fundraising's been in my passion for years. The donuts, we would order hundreds of dozens, and my father would help deliver them. So maybe you sold 20 dozen for that Saturday, and your neighbor friend sold another 20. So we would deliver on a Saturday morning to all of the different homes that had sold 20 or 10 dozen, so forth. And that money went to our summer house party. So I grew up in high school going to Panama City, which is out near Sandestin, Florida, the Gold Coast. And we would have a beautiful, back then it was beautiful. Now they're gorgeous $1 million homes and condos up and down the strip. But we would have a beach house with a screened-in porch. And back then they had concrete pavilions with a roof over and benches and jukeboxes. And we danced, and my brother and I were fabulous dancers, but so was my mother and dad. So dancing's been a part of my life all my life. And Larry, my husband, was a good dancer too. So we had 6 or 8 couples at Michigan State that we were going to dances together at the different clubs. So Panama City was our summer where our fundraising money went to help fray part of our expenses. Because my mother was not alive, other mothers would chaperone for the week or 2 weeks. My dad would drive us down, 1 carload, and then 2 weeks later he would come back for us. So that was his participation.
What was your vision for your future at that point in high school?
I was very, very hurt, crushed, offended with the negative racial divide of Birmingham. And this was before Bull Connor and the burning of the building of the church and all of that. So that was younger. And where it came from, I do not know. I've tried to search. My aunties were not prejudiced. My father was prejudiced to the large group. Individually, he was not prejudiced, but he was a prejudiced person in the large group of Blacks. Individually, he would do anything for the individual, but somewhere in my soul, I have been a rebellious young teenager, and I knew I needed to leave Birmingham and take myself away from as much as possible to find a husband that was non-prejudiced, that could raise my family non-prejudiced in this world. And so that was my goal. I have recently found a paper that I wrote when I was like 22, describing what I thought for my future. And everything has come to be with the help of the good Lord. So I've been very blessed and very lucky to have moved out of what I felt was negative, and I've tried to live a very positive life, and doing for others was my goal. And when I joined the sorority, that was one of, again, a greatest gift at the University of Alabama. And I had to, due to family situation, negative family situation, my father had remarried, and she was very resentful of the money that I was spending going to the University of Alabama and being in a sorority. So I quit college after 1.5 years. And again, women have been just beautiful coming into my world. And the sorority chapter president was asked to be a national traveling secretary. And she said, I can't do that because I'm getting married, but a gal has just quit college that you should look at her because she is and should have been president of our chapter. And she is a kind of a born leader. And they called, and then they took me under their wing, and I traveled from age 20 to 25, coast to coast. We then had 125 chapters. They took me to New Orleans first to try to see if I was able to travel, being from the South and all. They were concerned that I might be prejudiced. And So they sent national officers in to me. I was at Sophie Newcomb at Tulane for 6 months for them to train me. And I then traveled. Each summer, I would take my stipend of money and go back to the University of Alabama. So I accrued up to 3 years at the University of Alabama. While I was traveling, I was at Oklahoma State University. At that point, I always called on the administration, the Dean of Women and the administration, to see how the chapters were doing and how the alumni were relating and socializing and helping the chapters. So Zelma Patchen was the Dean of Women, and she offered me a job to be on her staff in charge of a dorm of 450 women. I said, thank you, but no thank you, because you can't offer me this program. So I had to confess, because I was not supposed to tell the collegiates that I did not have a degree. So I said, thank you, but you can't offer it to me because I do not have my undergraduate degree. So the next day she called back and she said, I have you a 3-year program. We will transfer all credits to you to Oklahoma State and get your degree and your master's. And so while I was there, the president called one of her grad student buddies, Larry J. Connor, and said, can you take this person? We don't know what to do with her over the weekend. And so we will have to, we just don't want her to sit around. He said, well, I don't do blind dates. Well, anyway, she twisted her arm, so we had a blind date. So a year and a half later, I did come back and took the Dean of Women's up on her program. And my picture was in the paper, in charge of a dorm, Willard Hall, 450 girls. I had 7 student counselors under me. And he called for the second date. He then called back and said, can you get one of my buddies a date with with one of your other gals? I'm going to go and introduce my third friend to another one of the counselors that he knew. So all 3 couples got married. So we had our second date and the others had their first dates. And so it wound up all 3 couples got married at Stillwater. So I wound up with my Mrs., I wound up with my undergraduate and my master's at Oklahoma State.
And then how did you get to Gainesville?
Larry, we were going into Washington, D.C. when the call came to Michigan State. I said I had already been on that campus. You go and see if you like it. They offered him the agricultural economics position. So we left Stillwater and then spent 25 years at Michigan State University. He was chairman for 10 years and faculty for the rest of his career at 25 years. I was president of the Faculty Wives Group. I sold real estate for 17 years. I was president of the Women's Realtors Association, and we were heavily involved in our church and raising our 2 children. Our kids were born there. Noelle, my daughter, the firstborn, went to Michigan State, and then she got her master's at the University of Florida. My son, Kevin Darrell Connor, went to that other school, the University of Michigan, and then he has a naturopathic medical degree from Bastyr University in Seattle. So he's a naturopathic medical doctor in Seattle. So we were at Michigan State for 25 years when his ag economist friends told him he should apply for the dean's position at the University of Florida. So he came down, we came down together and interviewed, and he called the dean's, the vice provost, the president's wife, and said, you're supposed to take her to lunch, but he needs to talk to her. So they offered him the job right off the bat. And so I did not get to go to lunch with the VP's wife. And he said, Dee Ann, it's up to you. I know you are so solid at Michigan State with your career and your friends and all of your activities. And I said, Larry, whatever you want is fine with me. I'll pack up and we will come. So he accepted the position. And we had friends that had come the year before for a leadership program that we had at Michigan State. So this was Dr. Gene Trotter. He's Ag Ed, and Larry got permission for him to come into Ag Econ to work on our leadership program. And Gail and I had done real estate together, so they were then told that we were coming. So out of the blue, I had a welcome call from Gail Trotter. So we had lots of catching up on the phone. And then she said, send me 2 checks, one for University Women in the amount of such and such, and the other for Ag Women. These are 2 organizations you will join immediately. And so she then, as we were moving to Florida, I was building a house in Gainesville. And this would be my 3rd house to build. And Gail knows me very, very well. So she volunteered my house for the Gainesville Women's Garden Club big fundraiser that's at Christmas. So I said, but Gail, I haven't built the house yet. And so I said, it's okay. You'll get it done. You'll get it done. So yes, I got all my furniture reupholstered. I got the house built. I got everything decorated for the garden club to come in and put up trees and do their finite decorating. And so we had a fundraiser at my new home. So of course, then Gail volunteered my house for the Ag Women's social for the holiday party. So we had about 104 people there, and we served Larry Connor's famous 2-2-1 bourbon punch. It's 2 liters of club soda, 2 liters of frozen lemonade, and a 1/5 of bourbon. And people all over the country have called us for our recipe. So that's the Connor recipe for the bourbon punch. So that's how I got into Ag Women. Gail drugged me that first year to various things. I wasn't sure if I was at Ag Women's or University Women. And I think you'll see through all of our interviews the overlap of both groups. So many of the women have served as president and served on the board for both groups. So the intertwining of Ag Women and University Women, my first year was definitely confusing because I wasn't sure which group I was at. And anyway, it was a wonderful introduction to a new community, and has been a very strong, big blessing in my world.
Well, you didn't have any choice really when you came to join. I guess you were practically, you were a member even before you got to Gainesville, I guess.
Right. Yes.
So that brings us very nicely to the subject of the Agricultural Women's Club. So I'll let you, you are the one who knows probably most about the early founding and early history of it. And so please tell us about that. Well,
I'll start with showing you, this was our 100th anniversary celebration booklet. And in here is just some interesting facts, a brief synopsis of the history of the club. We have turned over to the library a wonderful booklet bound by Marcita Hoffman. And in that, you will find wonderful pictures of this 100th celebration and a little bit more of the history. You, Kathy Kidder, and Becky Samlins have also written an update beyond this 100th anniversary that is, again, a wonderful, more detailed of the history after this. The founding was 1908, and the celebration was 2008, so the 100-year celebration. In the new booklet, bound by Marcita, a scrapbook, is kind of a duplicate of this picture. This is a Model T Ford with the Dean of Extension and his wife in.
Can you hold that a little to your left? There you go, and up.
Yep.
Right.
And it's just a picture of some of the women, Dr. Ralph and his wife in a Model T Ford. Well, Liz Shaw and Larry Shaw, and Liz will be interviewed later. He has a collection of antique cars. So he brought one of his antique Model Ts to the driveway of the president's house for our event and parked it there for the several hours that we were in celebration. I'm going to kind of start with some of the history that we wrote, just a synopsis of this. This Dr. P. Henry Ralph and Mrs. Ralph, he was the Dean of Agriculture and the Dean of Extension. She was the one that started the women's group, and they had several different names of Extension, and so therefore she had several names that was given to our club. And so we were first called the Extension Club of the women, and later it was then presented and turned into the Agricultural Women's Club, because the changing of the college had varied to such a degree. And then they later settled on Agricultural Women's Club. In the town, you came to the railroad station. I don't know if people are aware of the fact that the University of Florida was first in Lake City and then moved later to Gainesville. And it was basically started as a military school. But anyway, the membership was first started at about 40 women, and they met every 2 weeks, and sometimes they would have picnics, but they would meet in different homes, and the wives just took turns preparing the foods for the social life. It was primarily social and sewing as their mission, so to speak. Over the years, the mission has grown beautifully, but in Gainesville, they had in 1906, the city was not paved. So they would take from the train station, they would have a horse and buggy to come down a graveled, unpaved road that later became University Avenue. The horse and buggies were from the train station down into the homes. Alachua County and University of Florida struggled in those early years, and especially in the early 20s. They had the boll weevil infestation for the cotton industry. And it also was in the 20s, they had the stock market crash and so forth. So it was the city of Gainesville and Alachua County were very hit during the 20s and so forth. But Gainesville was strong and coming back, but again, it was hit with the Depression and so forth. In 06, I think it was 06, yes, the university had 102 students, 15 faculty, and the president was Albert A. Murphy. Note the name Albert, because it was Albert Murphy that then selected the colors of orange and blue, and he chose the mascot. And guess who he named? The alligator. The alligator became the mascot, and Albert became the alligator's name. And so that's how we have our Albert, from the first president, Murphy. Murphree is his last name. But at that point, they had 4 different departments, and they had a graduate school. And I'm not sure if everybody does remember the fact that the land grant is called the Morrill Act. Was the Morrill Act gave to every state a land grant university, because the elite, the East Coast, and every state had a very elite school. Michigan, University of Michigan was our elite school. The land grant became Michigan State, the land grant. You're familiar with Iowa, University of Iowa, and Iowa State. Ohio State. The land grant for Florida would have been Florida State. However, Florida State was a teacher's college, and all the women were there. And Florida was the military, and so the men were here at Florida. So in giving the land grant was thus given to University of Florida, the land grant for the state of Florida. In giving that is now the Institute of Florida Ag, IFAS, and CALS, College of Agricultural Sciences. That's what the IFAS and CALS stands for, Institute of Florida Agriculture, and the CALS is the College of Agriculture, Life Sciences. So that's where the naming has come from. And so in the beginning, there were only 4 departments back in this 2009 that Murphy was the president. Finally, there was 1 female admitted into the College of Agriculture. Her name was Lassie, Lassie, Goodbread Black, Goodbread Black. She was enrolled in the College of Agriculture, and 2 years later, we had 5 more women. And the women were allowed to come to University of Florida in the summer, because at that point, the men were coming back and kind of being housed from the war at Camp Blanding. And this
Which
is back,
war are we
back
talking
in the 40s. Back in the 40s.
Which war was that, Dee Ann?
World War II. Back,
Okay.
I've skipped from the entrance of the women, and then where the influx of the men came from. The influx of men came from the GI Bill, and so many men were stationed at Camp Blanding. So that's where in the 40s, the influx of men came from. But
so was the Agricultural Women's Club active through that whole period, through the First World War into the Second?
And the overlay was still, thank you for that question. The overlay was again with university women and agricultural women, because they both groups took on during the war the blood drives. They took on the selling of the war bonds. They took on the selling of the war bonds, the defense of the Red Cross and Red Cross fundraising. And then they had a decade that the clubs instituted customs and contributing to the toy drive of the, it was called a Marcus Flagg Children's Home for Children here in Jacksonville. I say here in Jacksonville only because I have now moved to Ponte Vedra Beach, so that's where I'm located at the moment for 7 years. But you can see that through the early years, university women and ag women did fundraising and so forth together as part of the community. And then they had this wonderful fundraising for the children's home here in Jacksonville, and that came to a highlight of their every year Christmas party, that they would have a toy drive and bring all the toys to the children. But also, it was discovered that many of these families of ag women adopted children from this home. So to me, that was a very interesting point of their outreach, not only for servicing the children, but also bringing them to their families. And I just thought that was a wonderful, wonderful piece of information. The Ag Women's Club by 1950s had 164 active members, and they would have, and I'm hoping that Gail Trotter and Marcita, because they were our fun-loving, party-planning girls. So when you interview them, a lot of these activities, such as they had dinner dances, and they went to the different hotels and the different places. They had this Malvern Lake. They had picnic every summer out there for their social. And they had wonderful Halloween parties. They had theme parties. They had a big celebration with the University women as they approached their 75th anniversary of their being. And so they did a number of big social events with University women to help their celebration.
Those activities that you're talking about, Dee Ann, who was participating? Were these for the families as well as?
It was mostly the luncheons and so forth would be the women. And then the picnics and the gathering for evenings would include the men. The family picnics would include the whole family. So they had the three different stages, one of just the women, the other, and we continued that to our end because we would have dinner parties and speakers and so forth. And the men would come and we'd have a little wine bar. And so it was also for the men to integrate, to understand each other with crossing their disciplines. And so that was a good thing for them in terms of socialization. We women all knew each other very closely and intimately, but sometimes the men don't get that opportunity to cross-index their disciplines. So this was a fun social way for them to gather and know each other better.
What kind of community outreach, you talked about the fundraising and so on, were members of the community allowed to join these organizations?
In the very beginning, no. After I came here and I became president of University Women first, we then put a rule in that outside the university could become a member. And so we opened it to community at that point. But for the early years, it was faculty wives or faculty females. And so it was at that level. But after I came and became president of University Women, then we opened it for good measure, to the outside community, because a lot of us had other friends, et cetera, that we wanted to be inclusive with.
So the faculty, there were women faculty as members as well?
There were some women faculty that belonged, and but mostly it was the wives, because again, the faculty wives were busy with their research or their teaching and so forth. But we did bring in, from time to time, a few of the faculty wives.
Okay, so we are up to the 50s and the activities that carried on into the present time. And are there more highlights you'd like to mention?
While I was president of University Women, they had a fundraising as I walked into it being president. And so I finished following through with that, and we got matching funds from the state. And so we raised 130,000, 123,000, and got 100,000 matching funds. And it was also in that time period that Catherine Lombardi, the president's wife, called me and asked what would I need to create a clubhouse. You know, what would she be looking for? So I formed a committee that would give the special needs for a clubhouse. And that would be a commercial kitchen, wonderful bathrooms, properly built bathrooms, parking. And we gave a list of about 20 things. So they wanted our land for the women's softball. Well, after we went through all of that, the land that we were in a clubhouse that had been given by one of the presidents to university women, they had, it was not big enough for the women's softball. So later it was then built on our land for the clubhouse, University Women's Clubhouse. And we used that. All we had to do was the beginning of the year, put down every one of our Ag Women activities. And we had that for our luncheons, our dinners, and our social. So that's how we became involved from Ag Women into using of the clubhouse. And it is the basketball practice court and offices. It's the building adjacent to that, and that's just been named the Billy Donovan basketball building. And the building next to that is the clubhouse that University Women and Ag Women have had use of all these years since then.
How long were you president of the Agricultural Women's Club?
The Ag Women's probably 10, 12 years or whatever. It was just a matter of nobody really wanting to do it. And we had a wonderful nucleus of a board, very, very involved and very active. And so, we couldn't let it go. So, yours truly just was a de facto president. No big deal. Just a level of need more than anything else. I was able to kind of, organize for the year. I had wonderful people to be committees and do the work. And Mary Martsoff was fabulous in putting together our monies. She shepherded our monies to grow into our scholarships. Now, when I came in 91, I thought the scholarships had been going on for years. And as it turned out, it was not. It was actually their first year was 1990 or 91. And the vice president, well, he was the dean of extension at that point, Jim Davidson, and Peg were big with purchasing for their girls jewelry at Klaus Jewelers. Klaus, it was a very good, expensive jewelry. So they would give us a piece of jewelry. And so we would raffle tickets for the sale of a raffle ticket. And all the men for our holiday party were kind of forced into purchasing for us. And so it was very fun and cute. And one year I took the piece of jewelry on a silver tray, and Marcita passed it around to everybody. And it was at that party that E.T. York said, well, tell me about the scholarship. And I'm thinking, you've been here a lot longer than I have. You should know about our scholarship. So it was at that point that he called me and said, I want to honor Vam, his wife, with a scholarship. So he gave us $10,000 towards a scholarship, and that stayed at the foundation. But each year we would draw $500 off of that money and present a VAM C. York scholarship. So that was the beginning. What he asked was for me to write a note of this, that we were excited to put a scholarship in her name, and he would put it under the Christmas tree. Well, he did the same thing for VAM at Santa Fe Community College. So he set up a scholarship there. So over the years, we gave $500 scholarships in VAM's name. And then at the end of E.T. York's life, VAM called because we had a Larry J. Connor scholarship, and she was asking about our monies in that. And so anyway, she went ahead and paid off, because we had an E.T. York scholarship also. So she paid off his and she paid off hers as E.T. passed. And so that's how hers became endowed. She took the $10,000 and she added the 30, thus endowing hers. So as a result, Ag Women have 3 endowed scholarships. One, the VAM Caldwell York Scholarship, the Agricultural Women's Scholarship, and the Dee Ann S. Connor Scholarship. So that's the history of those 3. Now, at the 80th birthday of yours truly, Gail Trotter, my special friend that drug me into everything, hooked up with my daughter, Noelle Connor Franco, and surprised me with sending a notice of my 80th birthday to family and friends. So they gathered almost $7,000 for my 80th birthday to go into the scholarship money. So that's why we now have over $50,000 in the endowed scholarship. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's quite an accomplishment, and that you you saw in your tenure as president. You can be very proud of that, and it is ongoing, as those scholarships will continue beyond us. So what did all this activity throughout your life, how did that impact your family and your husband and all of that?
My kids have been laughing and joking of mother's doings, kind of thing. But they were also proud of all the activities that I was involved in. But I could not have done it without a very, very progressive and fabulous husband, of being supportive. When I sold real estate in Michigan, he would take the kids. He wouldn't cook. He wouldn't come home and cook, but he took them out for their famous chocolate malts and hamburgers and so forth. And but very, very supportive, and very supportive in all my fundraising activities. So no, I could not have done it without a supportive husband, and one that was very proud of what we were achieving. And my kids always laughed and teased about mother, but my daughter is following in her mother's footsteps. She's very, very active here in Ponte Vedra, and is very, very concerned with community. And Kevin, as a doctor, is very much concerned with community.
Back to the activities of the club, can you describe for example, the 100th anniversary celebration? What happened there? What was it like?
Very elegant. What I did was set up committees so that we empowered more of our older women that didn't necessarily come and do everyday kind of work. But for instance, Liz took on, Liz Shaw was wonderful at at the state level of for flowers of the garden club. So she did our flowers for our centerpiece. We were at the president's home, and it's catered. So we had a committee to deal with the caterer and the foods. This brochure put together, we had a committee to develop the history and put the findings of that into the brochure. Part of that committee developed and did the drawing of an old-fashioned lady with a long skirt and wonderful antebellum sleeves with her top, and used that as our coverlet for our brochure for the 100th anniversary. Everything was gold and ivory. We had lace tablecloths. We had a beautiful buffet from our caterer. Gail was in charge of the bartending, and Gail Trotter, and did mimosas for us. And we had a committee to go back and try to come up with names for a woman of distinction. And we came up with Harriet H. Harriet's last name is Green. And yeah, she and her husband owned, and she was part of the business. So she was a businesswoman herself. The citrus and cattle farm in Vero Beach. And so we chose her because they have been such wonderful donors to IFAS and to our university in terms of money given for scholarships and for other things. So we honored her as part of our celebration that night. And so we had multiple, our families. My brother came up from, at that point, he was in Alabama, and he came to our celebration. And so it was just an elegant cocktail party kind of event. And the Shaws put their antique car out front for everybody to be welcoming, as thrusting us back to our early days. And it was well attended. We used that to set up a centennial funding, and we raised $13,000 to go into our treasurer for scholarships. So that was a big new foundation for funding at that point for the 100th.
Were most of the events elegant and formal like that one was?
There's always a Halloween party, and then there's always a fun with a country western band out at, the picnics were out at Lake, what did I say?
Wahlberg.
Mm-hmm. But then we had at the Forest Extension Service out on 310 or 3 whatever that highway is. It's a Forest Service, and we always had a wonderful party out there, and it would be more casual, and it would be kind of potluck, and we had like a country swing band that would come. Gail and several of them just loved the casual kinds of Halloween parties and those kinds. And so anyway, the luncheons or the scholarship dinners were more elegant and so forth. Our holiday Christmas, one year we used everybody that had them. I have Lennox Christmas dishes. So those that had Christmas dishes, we brought enough for one table. So we used our Christmas holiday dishes instead of the clubhouse's dishes. And that was a very elegant, beautiful table setting for each one was different, but it was a lovely way to celebrate the holidays. But it depended on the theme of the party. I know we had at University Women, we had a Mardi Gras party and a Mardi Gras theme. And my cousin sent over from Mobile the cakes, the Mardi Gras cakes with the baby in it. It cost me an arm and a leg, but I paid for it, and it was wonderful, worth every penny of it. But she sent the beads and all of the things for us to decorate with for that. And I think we were at Turkey Creek, that country club out there at that point for that celebration. But we usually had a theme and a lot of casual, but mostly more elegant, for the luncheons and the spouse dinners,
I was wondering whether there was any student involvement, and of course the scholarships impacted on that. But you mentioned a scholarship dinner. Did that involve students?
Yeah, but mostly when we gave out our scholarships was at the luncheon. And that way the kids could come over and eat and get back to class. And so that was our main thought there, is that they could take an hour, come, be celebrated, and eat lunch with us. And so most of those in these latter years have been at the clubhouse, for Ag Women's Scholarship and the others. If it was in the evening, they often brought, if they were married, brought their husbands. And that was a nice treat, for them as well, if they were married.
So the scholarships were just for women in agriculture?
All the way through until later, when we turned over our monies to the foundation through Dr. Elaine Turner. When we turned over the money, then, I hope I'm not losing you, due to federal regulations, we could not discriminate. We had discriminated all those years just for women. And so when we turned over the money and then allowed the Elaine Turner's office to start screening for the winners, then we had to be with the federal guidelines of men or women. So only until that point, originally and all through the history, it was for women only. And then when we turned the money over to the foundation, we had to go with federal guidelines and started giving to men as well.
Dee Ann, you presided over many years of really active times in the club and also over its demise. But before we get to that, is there anything else you'd like to say about the more active years in its history?
Well, we did create, and again, a lot of Ag Women. I was chosen or asked to put a good cookbook together, the Gator Cookbook. And it was primarily from University Women, but I had Gail Trotter, of course, and she did the children's section, she and another gal from University Women, and it's a fabulous chapter. It has pictures of the gorgeous buildings on campus done by my friend Vicki Wallace. And then we had Poucher. I'm not sure if you'll get to interview her, but her husband, and she wrote the history of each of the buildings to tag at the bottom of the pictures of the beautiful. And so those were our chapter dividers of our cookbook. I had Elaine Cheek. She did the typing for us. And both this cookbook and my Spartan Specialty Michigan State cookbook, I brought in the departments of food science, because they have a computer that you type in your recipe and the nutritional value comes down at the bottom of your recipe. So food science gave us 5 grad students to do the typing because we had 750 recipes in this cookbook. We made $20,000 for the university women, but I had a lot of ag women serve on the committee for that. So they were just equally in preparing for and selling of the cookbook. The money went to the new clubhouse for our silver, our dishes, our crystal, our wine glasses. And the last of that monies, I think there was about $8,000 left after we had years of using of the money of the $20,000. I think there was about $8,000 still left, and they bought the commercial grade dishwasher, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the kind of the ending of our $20,000. But everybody got involved in the selling and running around getting the monies and so forth. What we did was pre-sell the copies so that we never used the money from the treasurer. And we had a separate bank account to just deal with the cookbook monies. So we did not commingle any of those monies. And I had my own treasurer to help take care of all of that. And after 3 republications, I think my husband finally said, Dee Ann, no more in the garage, because the garage was our dropping off place. And then we dispersed out of our cars and to our organizations, but we did not use University Women's money at all. We did self-funding and then raised $20,000 at the other end of it.
Do you have any idea how many copies were sold?
No, I just know I did 3 orders and I could not order a 4th batch.
We're talking thousands, right? Were there thousands?
Yeah.
That was quite a project. Anything else you'd like to add about the club?
I wanted to be sure and thank my board, because none of this and the longevity could not have been sustained without you and Becky Sammons, Nancy Ingram, Gail Trotter, Mary Martzoff, Marcita Hoffman. I don't want to miss anybody. Liz Shaw, and I want to say regarding Mary Martzoff, she was the treasurer before you, and it was her money management that she moved the money from this account. We had the same bank account, but she would do checking the interest rates and so forth that really helped grow our money. But she was also instrumental in bringing me into hospice. And she called and said, you will love this group of women. So the short version of that is that I went to a meeting with Mary and met several of my future best friends, Nancy Perry and others, Kathy Nell, that we developed and designed the Decorator Show House. And
excuse me, this was the auxiliary of the hospice?
Well, it became the auxiliary, yes. We created the auxiliary. We first started as a Decorator Show House, and a builder would give us a home, and all the decorators would take a room, and it was the fundraiser for hospice, for patient care. We did not do patient care, we did fundraising. And a spinoff to that was the attic, which is now making millions of dollars. 2 of our gals took on the attic. and that's
That is
used.
the thrift store.
It is now thank you, the thrift store, and it is it's made $1 million something, over $1 million each year to go back into hospice and so forth. What we did was our initial monies, we were able to house and pay for 2 patients' rooms for the new hospice house. And then we created the hospice auxiliary. Mary Martzoff was the first president, and I was the second president. And that ties back to IFAS and Ag Women, because we drug all of our friends from University Women and Ag Women into the Decorator Show House. So all of it's called gathering, and it's so important that you gather your friends to widen your circle and then put them into other positions of either leadership or growth for themselves. And so we drug our nucleus of friends into hospice. The first $50,000 went to one room, and we called it the Decorator Show House. Then another $50,000, each room costs $50,000 because it has to be like a hospital room. Each of the second one was called the auxiliary for the second $50,000. Then we started funding the summer camps for the family kids that had cancer or whatever in their family, that the other siblings might have the need for an outing. And then what we did, this was E.T. York, and then back to IFAS. E.T. and Vam York were the early founders of the building that was then built. And E.T. and Vam's name, it's the E.T. and Vam York's hospice care, on the building. They have, at his death, she gave additional money for refurbishing the living room. So they've given twice once to build and then once to refurbish. Each of these rooms, the decorators that we were using for our decorator show houses then went to their vendors and got the blinds and the comforters and all of the furnishings within the room from their vendors at discount to help furnish the rooms. Then our garden clubs, which all of us were involved with different garden clubs, they either presented money or went out and dug the holes to plant the stuff, the shrubbery and so forth. My garden club was the gardenias. So these were old town and gown gals. We only wrote checks. We did not dig. And so we wrote our checks for the gardenias. And then there were bird houses and bird feeders at every window of the rooms for the patients to look out and see a garden. And so it was community, all the landscape people, donated and so forth. So it was a huge community effort to build the building, to fundraise with decorator show houses, then set up the auxiliary, and then set up the attic, which is called.
Just to clarify that you're talking about Haven Hospice.
It has been renamed of late to Haven Hospice. Mm-hmm. In the olden days, it was the hospice,
when it was the only one. Yeah.
And we were the auxiliary. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear how intertwined your influence has been through the whole community, not only the Agricultural Women's Club. Let's go back to the club, and what changes did you see over the time from the time you started?
What changes did I see?
Toward the end, till the end.
Our women became older, of course, and unable to do as much as they had done in the past. Individuals had passed, We had wonderful leaders for our scholarship chairman, for the selection of our winners and so forth. So all of that was carried on after someone was deceased. So we had people to fill in the blanks, so to speak. I was very grateful that we had, at the point that we had Becky Salmons, Nancy Ingram, and you to bring in a fresh, kind of a new generation of leadership. And that's what we needed, you know, and y'all came in at kind of the right time that we were losing some of our senior members. And so we needed that refreshing look to everything, and also to give us stability and hope that we weren't crazy to keep continuing. And there were several points before I moved over here, and I've been here 7 years, but there was times when some of the group wanted to disband early. And there was probably stubbornness or whatever you want to call it, but I just felt that there was still something to achieve. And little did I know what it could be. And it was in that you have provided a wonderful direction and working with IFAS, Elaine Turner, to transition our monies to create the 2 new endowed scholarships. And so we have you and Gail Trotter to thank for that. We also are thankful for your connections with your either your friends or your contact, to be able to find, because we had contacted years ago the library to see if they wanted university women's scholarship scrapbooks and memorabilia, and they said no to us. So when you came forward with the fact that the library was having 2 new, the women's studies and the minorities, it was like, oh my God, this is why we are still in existence, because all of that history can be saved. So that was your great contribution yourself with your connections to preserve and save our history.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And it was June of this year, 2020, that we finally closed out the bank account and did the final closing and official end of the club.
Uh-huh. And it was you and Gail that were able, because I was already over here. And so I'm indebted to you two for the final, to dot the I's, cross the T's, and close out the bank account, which was wonderful.
Good. Okay, any final thoughts on the club part of our conversation?
I can't think. I know that I wanted to thank the board and you and Gail, especially with these latter years. And I want to address the women of tomorrow. So whenever you think that I can approach that.
I think that would be a nice thing to do now, and then I have a different kind of question for you later.
Okay. I would like to address the women of tomorrow, because I do know that part of these last 10 and 15 and 20 years, the women have not joined organizations. And so I want to address the future. And I hope that they will find a group that will give purpose beyond themselves, beyond their spouse or their partners, beyond their families, something that is of a greater purpose than their own being. I want them to serve others with great purpose. I want them to mentor other women. I want them to lead other women. I want them to employ and gather others that will enrich their lives, but also enrich the lives that they come in contact with. I want them to be enlightened and stay involved with strong women. It is women helping women that lifts us all up. And women to women is our answer to lots of our future problems. Reach beyond yourself. I call it gathering, and bring others into your circle of life. The wider your circle of friends, the more enriched your life will be, and you thus enriching the lives of others. Thank you.
That's a wonderful message and a wonderful philosophy summary of your life goals. But now I'd like to turn from all the good that you've been able to do to where you are now with this extraordinary pandemic year. What effect is it having on your life?
Well, my son is in Seattle, and as I said, he's a naturopathic medical doctor. And Seattle was one of the first states to be hit with this. So, of course, my concern has been him and his family. He has had to go on the virtual telecommunication with his patients and so forth. One of his hospitals has shut down quite a bit, but his university is still thriving and doing, but they're concerned for enrollment for the fall. And and they too are concerned for their kids starting back to school and how they're going to operate that 1 day or 2 days or all virtual. So they're all in that level of decision making. My daughter here in Ponte Vedra has 2 boys, and they are, as of this fall, both in high school, freshman and a junior. She is very involved in the community and has had to do a lot of committee work by Zoom. So she has been very still involved, but making changes for a future direction. The boys have gone back in the last 4 weeks to their sports. The freshman is going into basketball, and the junior is varsity football. Again, she is in charge of communication between the coaches and the parents. So she is emailing direction and communication of how to enter back to the sports world of training, contacting with people, etc. So in that, in her world, but they shut me down on Friday, the 13th of March. They, I think, locked the door and threw away the key. But they have brought the groceries and the shopping, so she's done everything to protect me. And the boys, I've only had a couple of dinners over there, and they have been very guarded. But once they started back to being open with their sports, I've not had contact with the boys. And so right now, the freshman with his basketball tournament contacted and is been exposed. So he has tested positive. And Noelle has come down with some of the symptoms, but very little. And but knowing she was in contact with her son quite a bit, they've all, Al has just been tested, Noelle's been tested, and there will be 4 and 5 days before the end results. We think that Connor and Al, the junior and the husband are not showing any signs of anything at this point. Kellen has started a little of the symptoms, and Noelle has gotten a rash and is showing just a few. But like she says, Mother, I am fine. I don't have the major symptoms, nor does Kellen. Kellen is the freshman. And so for me not to worry with them, that they are handling it and doing. Their friends have brought in their meals and done their shopping for them, because I can't go into the stores. So she has restricted me from shopping. So if I need anything, the friends will shop and bring to me, and as well. But I'm well stocked with everything I need and so forth. So I have been blessed with knowing both families are okay, but the new exposure has, led me to a little more worried than I was before. My brother and sister-in-law just had emergency surgery. My brother did, and they are out in Miramar, which is out I-10 with the Panhandle, and they do their doctoring here at Mayo. So I've had them as house guests. And so before Noelle was exposed, she did not see them at all, nor the boys, but she did prepare 2 big meals for us and brought it in and left the building. So she has serviced us well and made sure I had plenty of food for me to service my brother and sister-in-law. So that I'm very grateful, and I'm very grateful that I'm here, in that my brother can come and get good medical care at Mayo. So I'm thinking that, again, I have been blessed. I've been writing quite a bit of my own personal history, and that my son wants me to do a Zoom with someone to record my history. And so I've been doing a lot of writing, and with the racial unrest, I've been writing about my history of Birmingham, Alabama, on the racial situation. And I do feel my husband integrated the bars at Oklahoma State. And so I've had his wonderful support with everything I've wanted to do. I could not ask for a better marriage. His family adored me and welcomed me into a huge, big Connor family. We have a reunion every 2 years of the Connors. This summer we were to be in Colorado Springs with all the new babies that have been born. And so all of that we had to cancel. But there's now about 30 of us, of the Connors. And we've hosted them here at the beach. And we have been to Minnesota, Colorado, Montana, the glaciers. We've been to weddings. And so we have done this wonderful continuation of the Connors. And so I'm so proud of that, because that'll be done even after I'm gone. And we've laid the foundation for them to continue. And so again, how blessed am I? A little girl from Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you, Dee Ann. Before we finish, anything else you have so many wonderful thoughts and reflections. Is there anything we haven't covered?
I don't think so. I think we've covered the scholarships, and I know that others will have things that I don't remember. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful, and I was in Gainesville almost 24 years. Larry passed 11 years ago, and I stayed on. So to have 25 years at Michigan State, which was phenomenal and fantastic, and then to have almost 24 at Gainesville. And like one of my girlfriends said, Dee Ann, it is time for you to go and be near Noelle. because I was in my 70s, at that point. She said, you can still join groups and make new friends and go while you're healthy. So that's what I did. Emotionally, it was very difficult. Intellectually, it was the thing to do. And I would definitely encourage anyone to go ahead and bite the bullet and make that transition while you've got your health and your sanity to do it without the pressure of an illness. So I'm glad I did it. And I joined 3 groups over here just for meeting new people and luncheons and so forth. And again, they each have a philanthropic outreach. And my grandsons have a philanthropic outreach. Each year they do, it's called a peanut butter drive. And they we give checks, and everybody that comes to their parties have to bring peanut butter. So we are providing to the beaches and a new organization down in St. Augustine for wayward boys. They now have 4 houses to outfit about 40 young boys. And so Noelle has taken them down there to meet the board and the administrators. And so that's the new philanthropic project for the boys. So we're trying to carry on doing for community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking the time to record these observations and reflections on your life and experience. It is much appreciated.
Well, and we thank you for taking the leadership and the time to coordinate all of this, because that is a feat within itself. Thank you.
I will now end the interview.
Okay.